the winter morning in Boston was quiet. Elizabeth Monroe smiled at the snowy scene visible through the window and gently placed her hand on her belly. "Good morning, baby," she whispered. 5 months into her pregnancy, her stomach was finally beginning to visibly round. She still vividly remembered the joy she felt when the ultrasound showed it was a boy. "Eliza, I've made coffee." Michael's voice called from the kitchen. Elizabeth looked at herself in the mirror as she brushed her hair. Faint shadows were beginning to form under her eyes, the result of pregnancy-related changes and the busy schedule at her editing job at the publishing house. "Thank you," she said as she entered the kitchen, where Michael handed her a cup of decaf coffee. "Since you've been coming home late lately, I wanted to at least prepare something proper in the morning." Elizabeth smiled at her husband's kindness, though something was bothering her. Indeed, Michael had been coming home later recently. His promotion at the securities firm and his new position of responsibility seemed to be the natural explanation. "What time will you be home tonight?" Elizabeth casually asked. Around 7, I think. But I can't promise, we've got a new project coming in," Michael answered while checking his cell phone. "Oh, Carol sent a message. She wants to go shopping with you this weekend to pick out my birthday present." Carol was Michael's sister and Elizabeth's sister-in-law. With her doll-like features and model-like figure, she was particularly striking among the family members. "I see," Elizabeth smiled. "You'll have fun with Carol." In reality, her relationship with Carol wasn't bad, at least that's what Elizabeth thought. Since she started dating Michael, she and Carol had often gone shopping or seen movies together. She still vividly remembered how Carol had served as her bridesmaid and given a heartfelt speech at their wedding.
"Can you imagine making $10,000 a month just from YouTube, all from home? That's exactly what I did with Candlelight Stories. No face, no voice. Check the link in the description if you're curious."
Elizabeth nibbled on her toast while checking her phone. There was a message from her mother-in-law, Judith. "Elizabeth, my dear daughter. I'm starting preparations for Thanksgiving next week. Is there anything special you'd like to eat? We must take care of a pregnant woman's appetite." Her in-laws, Robert and Judith Monroe, were well-known figures in Boston society. Robert had been successful in real estate investment, and Judith was actively involved in charity work. Even at 65, they both remained energetic. Elizabeth remembered feeling overwhelmed when she was first introduced to them, but they had welcomed her with unexpected warmth. Judith had especially said, "I never had a daughter, so I'm truly delighted to have you." "I'm looking forward to Thanksgiving," Elizabeth said to Michael. "Your mother says she's preparing something special." "Ah, Mother's turkey is the best," Michael smiled. "This year is special. Our child will carry on the Monroe family traditions in the future." He gently placed his hand on Elizabeth's stomach. Elizabeth was enveloped in happiness. Her life with Michael, whom she had met in college and married 5 years ago after a long courtship, was just as happy as she had imagined. And now, she was carrying their child, the fruit of their love. She couldn't ask for more. "Oh, another message from your mother," Elizabeth said, looking at her phone. "She wants to take a family photograph before Thanksgiving. She says, 'I want to have one last picture of the 4 of us before the baby is born.'" Michael finished his coffee and stood up. "That sounds nice. Mom and Dad are really looking forward to this. We'll be even busier once the baby arrives." Elizabeth nodded. Indeed, her in-laws seemed to be eagerly awaiting their grandchild's birth. When they learned it was a boy during last month's checkup, Judith had cried with joy. The Monroe family heir, she had repeated several times, already beginning to collect baby clothes and toys. "I'll get ready," Elizabeth said, standing up to kiss Michael. He embraced her and promised, "I'll come home early tonight." On Thanksgiving morning, Elizabeth woke up feeling foggy-headed. Her throat was dry, and she felt slightly nauseous. Morning sickness should be long over, she thought, but with today's plans, she couldn't afford to be ill. "Are you all right?" Michael sat on the edge of the bed and placed his hand on her forehead. You don't seem feverish, but you look pale. I'm just tired, Elizabeth smiled. The deadlines at the editorial department have been piling up. And the baby was very active last night. Michael gently stroked her hair. Don't push yourself. Let's take it easy today. I'll drive. Elizabeth nodded. Indeed, despite his recent busy schedule, he was considerate of her. She should accept that his late returns home were due to work demands. Thinking this way made her feel a little lighter. 2 hours later, they arrived at the Monroe mansion. As they walked through the snow-covered garden toward the heavy wooden door, it opened, and Carol rushed out. Eliza, Mike. She embraced them with a smile. I've been waiting. Dad and Mom have already started cooking. Carol seemed particularly radiant today. Dressed in a deep red dress, her golden hair waved elegantly. Elizabeth felt a little embarrassed about her own simple maternity dress. Sis, you look pale, Carol took Elizabeth's arm. Are you okay? I've prepared a special herbal tea for you. It's good for morning sickness. Thank you, Elizabeth said. But my morning sickness is over now. But pregnant women need to stay hydrated, right? Carol led her to the kitchen and offered a large mug that was already prepared. I've been wanting you to try this. It's a special herbal blend. Elizabeth gratefully accepted the cup. A sweet, fragrant aroma rose from the purplish-brown liquid. After taking a sip, she felt her body warming strangely. It's delicious, she smiled. What herbs did you use? It's a secret, Carol put a finger to her lips and winked. It's a family recipe. In the dining room, Judith and Robert were making final preparations for the meal. The table was set with Thanksgiving traditional dishes, a magnificent turkey, cranberry sauce, sweet potatoes, green bean casserole, and more. Elizabeth, I'm so glad you came, Judith embraced her. I also prepared special non-alcoholic sparkling wine for you. Thank you, Mother, Elizabeth appreciated such thoughtful consideration. As they sat down, Robert offered a prayer of thanks. We are grateful to be together today, and for the new life that will soon join our family. Elizabeth held Michael's hand, savoring this happiness. However, as the meal progressed, she began to feel something was off. Michael and Carol kept making eye contact and exchanging small conversations. Once, when Carol touched Michael's hand, he quickly withdrew it. It's just my imagination, Elizabeth told herself. Elizabeth, try this cranberry sauce, Judith offered a large silver spoon. I made it with a special recipe. One I inherited from my mother. Elizabeth took some sauce on her plate and tasted it. It was certainly delicious, but had an unusual flavor. It has a unique taste, she said. There's a secret ingredient, Judith smiled. I can't tell you exactly, but I've added something good for your body. During the meal, Elizabeth excused herself to use the bathroom. Walking down the hallway, she noticed Carol's door was half open. Normally, she wouldn't pry, but strangely, her feet stopped. Peering into the room, she saw small medicine bottles on the dresser. Some kind of medication, she thought, but decided not to investigate further as it would be impolite. On her way back from the bathroom, she heard Carol and Michael talking in the hallway. They seemed serious, and Elizabeth thought she heard Carol say, "Everything's going according to plan." When she approached, they abruptly stopped talking and put on fake smiles. Dessert is ready, Carol took her arm and led her to the dining room. Mom's special pumpkin pie. Back at the table, Judith was cutting a large pie. Elizabeth, I saved an especially large piece for you, she smiled, placing a plate in front of Elizabeth. I made it with a special recipe, just for you. While eating dessert, Elizabeth felt increasingly uncomfortable. It seemed like everyone in the room was staring at her, especially Carol, whose eyes held a look of expectation. After the meal, they moved to the living room for coffee. As soon as Elizabeth sat down, she felt a slight pain in her abdomen. At first, she thought it was indigestion, but the pain gradually intensified. "Are you all right?" Michael seemed to notice the change in her complexion. "My stomach is," Elizabeth began to say, but suddenly, a sharp pain shot through her. She involuntarily doubled over. "The baby, something's wrong." The room began to spin, and voices became distant. Michael's face was before her, but it felt far away. Behind him, she could see her in-laws and Carol. All three were watching her calmly, for some reason. The last thing she thought she heard was Carol whispering, "Everything's according to plan." Then Elizabeth's world went dark. White light. Dazzling white light. That was the first thing Elizabeth recognized. Her eyelids felt heavy, her body immobile. When the question, "Where am I?" arose in her mind, the smell of antiseptic stung her nose, and a regular beeping sound reached her ears. A hospital. Elizabeth slowly opened her eyes. White ceiling, sterile walls, and pale light filtering through the window. She was lying in a bed with an IV in her arm. Her head was still foggy, but memories gradually returned: Thanksgiving dinner, Carol's herbal tea, Judith's special cranberry sauce, and the sudden abdominal pain. The baby. As she tried to utter those words, she placed her hand on her stomach. Something was different. Something was missing. She had the feeling that the small life's presence was no longer there. "Eliza." Hearing the hoarse voice, Elizabeth shifted her gaze. Michael was sitting beside the bed. His eyes were red and swollen, his face pale. He was gripping Elizabeth's right hand with both of his. "Michael, what?" Elizabeth's throat was dry, making it difficult to speak. "Eliza, you're awake, that's good." Michael had tears in his eyes. His expression showed obvious sadness. "I'll call the doctor." When Michael pressed the button, a doctor in a white coat entered a few minutes later. A man in his 40s wearing round glasses. He smiled gently at Elizabeth, but his eyes held something serious. "Mrs. Monroe, you're awake," the doctor said while checking her vital signs. "I'm Dr. Clark. You've been unconscious since last night." Since last night? Elizabeth was still confused. What happened? The doctor and Michael exchanged glances briefly. Elizabeth intuitively sensed that something bad had happened. Her heart began to race. "Mrs. Monroe, I'm sorry, but..." Dr. Clark seemed to be carefully choosing his words, with a grave expression. "We couldn't save the baby." Elizabeth's world stopped. The doctor's voice seemed to come from the other end of a tunnel. "A miscarriage due to a severe food allergic reaction." "Did you eat anything unusual?" Michael covered his face with his hands and began to sob, his shoulders shaking. Seeing this, something broke inside Elizabeth. "No, that's not right, the baby was healthy. I don't have any allergies." Her voice was raspy, her words trembling. "Sometimes during pregnancy, the body can react differently than usual," Dr. Clark continued explaining. "The test results showed components in your body that caused an unusual reaction. Probably some plant-based ingredient." In Elizabeth's mind, the words "special herbal tea" from Carol and "secret ingredient" from Judith resurfaced. But she couldn't voice it. Tears just streamed down her cheeks. "Let her rest for a while," Michael said to Dr. Clark. The doctor nodded and said, "I'll come back later," before leaving the room. When only the two of them remained in the room, Michael took Elizabeth's hand. "Eliza, I'm so sorry. I never thought this would happen." While listening to her husband's words, Elizabeth felt something was off. Michael's grief appeared genuine, but somehow seemed like an act. As she was about to say something, the door to the room opened. Robert, Judith, and Carol entered. All three were dressed in black, as if coming to pay respects. However, when Elizabeth saw them, she witnessed an unbelievable scene. The three had been whispering something as they entered, but their expressions showed emotions other than sadness. As Robert said, "Well, it can't be helped," Carol seemed unable to suppress a giggle. Judith was also trying to hide her laughter behind her hand, but not succeeding. "Why, are you laughing?" Elizabeth's question froze the air in the room. "My baby died." The three momentarily composed their expressions, but soon began to laugh again, looking at each other. Elizabeth couldn't believe it. "Eliza, calm down," Michael stood up and placed his hand on her shoulder. "Nobody's laughing. It just seems that way because you're in shock." But his voice was trembling. And Elizabeth clearly saw it. They were laughing at her tragedy, as if it were some kind of joke. "That's a lie. You're all laughing. My baby died," Elizabeth shouted. The monitor began to beep rapidly. "Elizabeth, be calm," Judith stepped forward, but her eyes showed only false concern. "It's natural for you to be confused. But we're here to support you." Carol said, "That's right, sis. We're worried about you," but her eyes were laughing. A cold, cruel smile. A nurse rushed into the room. "What's happening?" "The patient's heart rate is elevated." She looked sternly at the Monroe family. "Please be quiet, don't excite the patient." "I'm sorry," Judith said to the nurse. "I think she's confused from the shock." Elizabeth was trembling with anger and sorrow. As the nurse tried to calm her, she shouted, "Get out. All of you get out." The nurse turned to the Monroe family and said, "I'm sorry, but I must ask you to leave now." The three left reluctantly. Michael looked back at the last moment and said, "I'll come back later." At that moment, Elizabeth saw a cold light momentarily appear in his eyes. Left alone in the room, Elizabeth placed both hands on her abdomen and began to cry quietly. "Baby. I'm sorry. I couldn't protect you." Her tears wouldn't stop. However, amid her grief, questions began to sprout within her. Why was her family laughing at her tragedy? Why did Michael's sadness seem like an act? Why did she suddenly have a severe allergic reaction? Outside the window, snow continued to fall gently. In the cold air of the hospital room, Elizabeth began to realize she was at the center of some terrible secret. Her intuition screamed. This was no accident. This was planned. And behind that plan were the people she trusted most. On the day of her discharge, Elizabeth felt she was no longer the same person when leaving the hospital. Something inside her had broken, and simultaneously, something had awakened. The life in her womb no longer existed, but in its place, a cold determination had sprouted. Michael drove her home. "You should rest for a while," he said kindly, but his eyes weren't looking at her. "Don't worry about work. I've explained the situation to the publishing house." "Thank you," Elizabeth answered, gazing out the window. In her mind, the scene at the hospital kept replaying, her family laughing, Michael's false tears, and the doctor's words, "A miscarriage due to a food allergic reaction." Arriving home, Michael put Elizabeth to bed and made her soup. But she couldn't take a single bite. "You need to eat to regain your strength," Michael said, but she just shook her head. "I'm going to sleep a bit," Elizabeth said, waiting for Michael to leave the room. The next day, after Michael left for work, Elizabeth snuck into his home office. She sat in front of the computer and entered the password. Since their marriage, they had shared passwords, at least that's what she thought. But recently, she had noticed that Michael had changed his birthday. She tried typing, but an error message appeared. Anniversary. Wrong again. My name. Wrong. Carol. The screen opened. Elizabeth's heart raced. His sister's name. His password was his sister's name. Though her hands trembled, she began checking his emails. She needed to find some evidence. But she found nothing relevant. Next, she opened the Messenger app. There she found exchanges with Carol. Elizabeth's hand froze. This was evidence. But she still didn't know exactly what they had planned. As she continued reading messages further back, she found a photo Carol had sent a few weeks ago. It was a pregnancy test with 2 clear lines. Elizabeth looked away from the screen. Her head was spinning. Michael and Carol were having an affair, and Carol was pregnant with Michael's child. And, the obstacle, referred to herself and her baby. Judith was also an accomplice. She had put something in the Thanksgiving food. She immediately closed the computer and took out her cell phone. Her college friend Sarah worked as a pharmacist at a local hospital. "Sarah, I need your advice," Elizabeth said on the phone. "I want to know about drugs that can cause miscarriages." "Eliza, why?" Sarah's voice was filled with concern. "I'm writing a medical article," Elizabeth lied. "Specifically, I want to know about symptoms when mixed with food." Sarah hesitantly explained several drug names and their effects. Among them were drugs that cause symptoms similar to severe allergic reactions. Elizabeth noted everything. After hanging up, she took further action to gather more evidence. Checking Michael's calendar app, she found appointments with a gynecologist she didn't know about. Next, she checked Carol's social media. Her sister-in-law had recently been posting many complaints about feeling unwell. "Mornings are tough, morning sickness is really difficult," and other content clearly suggesting pregnancy. "I have enough evidence now," Elizabeth whispered. But seeking more decisive proof, she planned her next move. On the weekend, when Michael went out for work, Elizabeth headed to her in-laws' house. Saying, "I came to pick up something I forgot," she asked permission to stop by Carol's room. "Carol helped me pick out a Christmas present, so I want to check the size," she excused. Judith gladly agreed. "She's in her room. Just knock." When Elizabeth knocked on Carol's door, a voice from inside said, "Come in." Carol was reading a magazine on the bed. She smiled warmly when she saw Elizabeth. "Sis, you seem to be feeling better," her eyes held false kindness. "Yes, little by little," Elizabeth smiled back. "I came to check the size of the Christmas sweater." "Oh, that's in my closet." Carol stood up and walked to the closet. Taking this opportunity, Elizabeth quickly looked around the room. On the dresser, she saw the small medicine bottle she had noticed on Thanksgiving night. While Carol had her back turned, she quickly picked it up and checked the label. It didn't say, "drug to cause miscarriage," but it contained an ingredient named Sarah had told her about. Furthermore, she noticed that a drawer in the dresser was slightly open. Inside, she could see a small envelope. While Carol was still searching in the closet, Elizabeth quickly took out the envelope. It contained a card with Michael's handwriting, "Honey, soon our secret will take shape." She quickly photographed the evidence with her phone and returned everything to its place. When Carol returned with the sweater, Elizabeth acted as if nothing had happened. "Here it is. Hope you like it," Carol said. "It's lovely, thank you," Elizabeth smiled. Behind that smile, her heart was filled with calm anger. After returning home, Elizabeth organized all the evidence she had collected and formulated a plan. She had decided on revenge. But it wasn't just an emotional action, it was a calm action for justice. A week later, Elizabeth was invited to dinner by her in-laws. "We want to celebrate your recovery," Robert said on the phone. Elizabeth accepted the invitation. But this time, she was prepared. With a small recorder hidden in her bag and having already reported to the police, Elizabeth headed to the Monroe mansion. The courthouse hallway was silent. Elizabeth walked out of the courtroom with dignified steps. Today, the fate of the Monroe family had been decided. The trial lasted 3 months, during which the full extent of the cruel plan carried out by Michael, Carol, and her in-laws Robert and Judith was revealed. In addition to the evidence Elizabeth had collected, police investigations uncovered records of Judith purchasing drugs that caused miscarriages online, and evidence of Michael and Carol's affair. Carol's pregnancy was also made public, and DNA tests confirmed it was Michael's child. Carol and Michael had a special relationship since they were young, Judith testified calmly in court. They were meant to be together. Elizabeth was an outsider who would taint our pure bloodline. The courtroom froze at this statement. As the prosecution claimed, the Monroe family had planned to deliberately eliminate Elizabeth and her baby to welcome Carol and Michael's child as the true family. The sentence was severe. Michael and Carol received 15-year prison terms for attempted murder and conspiracy. Robert and Judith were also sentenced to 10 years as accomplices. The judge stated, "This is a cold and calculated crime committed in the name of family." Elizabeth took a deep breath outside the courtroom. It was over. She looked up at the sky and spoke to her lost child in her heart. Justice has prevailed. Your life was not in vain. A year later, Carol gave birth to her child in prison. However, under state law, her parental rights were revoked, and the child was placed for adoption. During a visit, Michael blamed Carol. "You ruined everything," he said. Between the two who had supposedly once loved each other, only resentment remained. Robert and Judith also aged rapidly in prison. Judith, once called the flower of society, had hair that turned completely white overnight, and Robert, once as strong as steel, was now an old man in a wheelchair. Their mansion was foreclosed, and most of their assets were given to Elizabeth as victim compensation. However, Elizabeth used all that money to establish an organization to support people who had experienced family betrayal. Named New Bonds, this organization began activities to provide legal and psychological support to victims of family violence and betrayal. There, she met David Clark, a lawyer who had also experienced family betrayal. David joined New Bonds as a legal advisor, and gradually, the two became close. David was kind and sincere, slowly healing Elizabeth's wounded heart. 2 years later, Elizabeth and David held a small wedding ceremony in a church. They were surrounded by friends who had become true family, though not blood-related. And a miracle happened. Elizabeth became pregnant again, this time with twin girls. The 2 girls were born on the same day Elizabeth had lost her first baby. A gift from God, Elizabeth cried as she held the 2 babies. Now, 5 years after the betrayal of Michael and his family, Elizabeth's wounds were not completely healed. Occasionally, she would remember her first baby and cry, but that memory had strengthened her. "Because of you, I was able to learn the true meaning of family," Elizabeth spoke in her heart, looking up at the starry sky. Her new family was bound not by blood, but by true love and trust. That was the answer to true family that Elizabeth had reached.